Hello and welcome. My name is Alex Romero from Galasso Learning Solutions. On this week's Genuine Learning blog, we will be looking at evaluating GAAP choice. Earlier this year, in March of 2025, the GASB released their study, Financial Reporting Framework Requirements for State and Local Governments Evaluating GAAP Choice. So this study is looking at evaluating the utilization of generally accepted accounting principles by state and local governments in the U.S. Now, the GASB has been doing this effort for around the last 40 years or so. We saw one of these studies released in 1987 and another one in 2008. So it's about every 20 years or so they are looking at this to see what the utilization for GAAP is, and if there have been any changes, what are the causes behind those changes. So our study objectives are really twofold. Our first one is looking at the state requirements. Which states are actually requiring the use of GAAP for the financial reporting? And then our second item is that if they do have that choice, what is going to be influencing those state and local government, the other government entities, to choosing something that is not going to be GAAP? To really look at that first objective, the GASB was going to be collecting information and those state requirements for the 4 different types of governments. We have our state level, our county level, our municipality level, and then those special districts. So initially, I had put this kind of in a paragraph form, but the end of this study has some really great figures, and this is one of those from the study. This is going to be showing a summary of the financial reporting requirements, and we have our columns here by state, county, municipality, and special district. So our first column here is our state, and what we're showing is that 48 states do require the utilization of GAAP. Then we have 2 states that are going to allow other financial reporting requirements. So they can have different types of reporting frameworks. And those categories can be non-GAAP is required, non-GAAP is required with exceptions, there's no requirements, or GAAP is required with exceptions. Now, the 2 states that do not enforce and require GAAP are going to be Rhode Island and Wisconsin. Our next column there is counties, and as you can see, one of the things I noticed here is that 20 plus 28 is 48, not 50. So where are those 2 other states? Well, first let's look at what is represented here. So we have 20 of those counties that are 20 of the states that are going to be requiring their counties to use GAAP, and then we have 28 that are going to allow for that choice. And then 2 of them, Connecticut and Rhode Island again, they actually don't have counties as a unit of government. Now, this is something that I didn't know personally. I mean, maybe I've heard of it in the past, but unless you're living in those areas or close to those areas, probably something that you're not aware of as well. Our next column is looking at those municipalities where we have even fewer. So 13 states are requiring those municipalities to use GAAP. And then they're allowing 37 states to have kind of that choice. And then we go down another step to our special districts where we have only 10 that are going to be requiring that GAAP utilization. We have 20 that are going to be allowing for that choice. And then there was another 20 that we were just unknown. The financial reporting requirements are not known at this point. So what were some of our key findings from looking at the different states, our counties, municipalities, and special districts? Well, what they found is that the utilization of GAAP is going to be higher among governments that have these typical 4 categories. So if we have governments that are larger by revenue, they are going to be more likely to utilize GAAP. If we have a state that doesn't have a well-developed alternative to GAAP, you see the local governments and the different governmental entities choosing to use GAAP. Our third item here is that if they are going to be subject to a single audit, they are receiving federal funding, then again, they're going to be more inclined to use GAAP. And lastly, if we have governments with that public debt, especially those that are going to be reporting and disclosing through that Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board, or EMMA, they are also going to tend to use GAAP due to that capital market pressure. Our next finding that we see is that we have 3 states, Indiana, Kansas, and Washington, where governments in these states are going to be 12 times less likely to adopt GAAP. So I highlighted and bolded there the word less, because when you read this, a lot of times I think we want to say more likely, but it's actually that they are going to be 12 times less likely to go ahead and adopt GAAP. And why is that? Well, these 3 states actually have templates, manuals, and trainings on those alternative reporting frameworks. So it's a little bit easier for governments in these 3 states to choose something that's an alternative because they have that support from their state. Our last key finding here is looking at what that utilization rate is. So this is going to be really looking at extrapolating the information from the sample that was used in the study by the GASB. What we find here is that counties are about 77 to 79%. They are going to be utilizing GAAP. Then our municipalities, the next level down, is going to be a little bit lower at that 66 to 74%. And then our special districts, what we found here is it's really highly variable. And we did see that we had 20 that we were unable to collect information, that we have unknown requirements. So we looked at our objectives for the study, what those key findings are, but what are going to be your key takeaways from this study? Well, the first thing is that the GASB found that there really hasn't been much change in who is going to be utilizing GAAP in the last 20 years. This is very similar to what they've seen and what they saw in that 2008 report. The next item here is that if there is going to be that support from the state, or if there's going to be something like a requirement where they're disclosing to EMMA, they have single audits that they need to be completing, that is actually going to be more of an influence on a government to choose GAAP or an alternative. And then the last item on here is that we really need to monitor those changes that are happening at the state and really looking at the GAAP utilization with those smaller governments where we have a little bit difficulty sometimes finding this information. So just because we can't find it now doesn't mean that we need to stop trying to look for it. We need to continue to do that. So that's one of our key takeaways, is that we have an understanding of what is happening in those smaller governments. I will say that when I'm going through this, I think that I've been in the government on the industry side, and while I'm in Colorado and we are using GAAP here, I could see that one of the things I would think about as something that would make me more likely to choose GAAP than an alternative is that there isn't just a lot of support outside of your local area, your community, or your state. And then if you're trying to attract people, and we know that the pipeline is always something that we're looking at, and especially in the public sector, that if we're using an alternative framework, it's going to be even more difficult to recruit. So that's kind of my 2 cents on it, where I would be favoring GAAP even if there was a choice, because I would want to be able to have those resources that are coming to everybody from a national stage. So again, thank you so much for joining me this week as we looked at evaluating that GAAP choice and kind of the differences in the state and local governments and who has the choices and who is going to be required to utilize GAAP. You can look at this full study. We have a link to it in the comments below. But thank you again so much for joining me, and have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.